Welcome to the International Criminology Conference 2022. It was supposed to be held in Paris. It will be probably done so next year. You are all going to be welcome for a non-virtual or non-totally virtual conference. And I'm happy and delighted to make the opening speech about criminological issues that is more focused on security, defense, intel, and war subjects, because the journal, the International Journal of Criminology, focused on all those subjects. You are welcome to apply and send projects and papers. You will see the last number, 9.2, about economy of violence, a special edition. And I will be presenting today a paper, opening paper on the unexpected but not unpredictable return of war. Nothing can excuse a premeditated attack of the Russian power against Ukraine. But denouncing it is not enough to analyze, understand, and above all, to react. The usual triptych of imprecation, incantation, and lamentation only serve to mask political impotence. After 1945, in spite of painful decolonization, wrested independence, and terrorism of all kinds, a fragile peace had managed to guarantee international borders. This interlude from the Yalta summit in Crimea to the fall of the Berlin Wall ended under the blast of bombs and in the blood of the fighting in Europe. History remains tragic, and from this turning point, another world will be born, new demarcation will emerge, new stakes will be imposed for the survival of freedoms and democracies. While the flow of data and information has become so abundant and so fast that we no longer have time to master its meaning, while alternative truths called fake news are submerging the information system everywhere, while there is no longer any absolute and common truth, while beliefs and distrust are multiplying, will Occidentals, Europeans, lost between the transhumanist promise and the unstructured metaverse, finally become a real power, or stay so? They have failed to consolidate the power since the European Defence Community project was established in 1954, and they still struggle to exist in between the superpowers, emerging or staying. In international relations, as in criminal or terrorist affairs, what seems new often turns out to be what has been forgotten. Amnesia has become our main enemy. We are gradually obliterating history, geography, perspective, and discovering that the present remains brutal. Cold War and hot peace. In 1989, the liberal democracy experienced their epiphany. Westerners believed in the rightness of their model and in its copy and paste diffusion. Faced with the dismemberment of the Warsaw Pact, the Atlantic Alliance had a doctrinal and moral corpus that was to dominate. The Soviet debacle in Afghanistan balanced the American disaster in Vietnam, and the account seems to be in balance. Detente is taking hold, borders are opening up, and freedom is progressing. A world of globalized, carefree people satisfying their consumers' cravings is taking hold. But already, the fall of the Berlin Wall was followed by the destruction of Tiananmen Square, and a new, unexpected adversary, albeit one cooked up in the back rooms of Pakistan with the help of Western services, is preparing to take the field. The matrix of the chaos to come has been established in 1979. Three events whose connections are not understood follow one another: the fall of the Shah of Iran, the attack of the Great Mosque of Mecca, the Soviet intervention in Afghanistan. Each one has local, regional, and international consequences, but the accumulation creates the condition for a major upheaval. The rising of the World Islamic Front for Jihad against Jews and Crusaders, improperly named Al-Qaeda, accompanied the outbreak of the Algerian Civil War, following the interruption of the electoral process that gave victory to the Islamic Salvation Front. Both movements have their backbone veterans of Afghanistan who fought the Red Enemy. The eschatological vision of the struggle changes the traditional profile of terrorism as another means of waging war. Everywhere after 1989, the straight-line borders imagined by the victorious great powers of 1945 are breaking down. A new world is emerging in pain. First in Yugoslavia, the door of the freezer that had frozen the Pandora's box of nation, peoples, tribes, and confession reopened. Nostalgic impulses and identity passions intermingle, where the colonizer, especially British but not only, had kept up ethnic groups that aspire to reunify Pashtun, Kurdish, Pearls, but also where national construction had left wounds infected by separatism or irredentism impulses, Basque Country, Catalonia, Ireland, Scotland, without forgetting curiosity such as the Falklands, Ceuta and Melilla, or Gibraltar. Europe is confronted with the breakup of Yugoslavia, a country that is a symbol of the non-aligned. In the Balkans, the stigma of the 4-year siege of Sarajevo or the 17-8 days of NATO air sorties bombing Slobodan Milosevic's Serbia in 1999 in order to spare Kosovo from ethnic cleansing is still present. Throughout these 3 decades, war has been waging on various fronts and in various forms, from classic confrontation to hyper-terrorist innovation until, in the strict sense of an armed conflict between 2 nations, with the aggressor also hitting the cities, it made its return to the heart of the old continent. And that it puts an end to an enchanted parenthesis of half a century. We are living in an historical and geographical cycle of vengeance. We need to reread the rhetorical essays on war, Ratzel and the struggle for vital space, Mackinder and the centrality of the world pivot, Schmidt and the need to designate the enemy, Mahan and the predominance of the maritime axes, Fuller and the superiority of the blitzkrieg. Without forgetting the French, Aron, for whom there is no instant superior to the state since each of them holds the monopoly of legitimate violence and, in the absence of a supreme arbiter, has a right to resort to it, and for whom any changes in the international system leads to a change in international relations. Or Durosel, whose historical, empirical, realistic and methodical enterprise endeavors to discern the role of ideas and regularities on the international scene, concluding from the inevitable confrontation that any empire will perish. And their successors, who tried to renew the genre in the light of the collapse of communism. Some describe the effect of the phenomenon, Luttwak, about the different levels of strategy, or Nye, about soft power. Others tried to decipher it. In 1992, inspired by Kojève thesis, Fukuyama declared that the end of history had come with the ideological victory of Western liberalism, whose supremacy did not mean the absence of conflicts. In 1996, Huntington announced the clash of civilization, considering that after having been predatory and then ideological, future wars will see the confrontation of a few large blocs determined by their cultural and religious identity. In 1997, Brzezinski drew the great chessboard, on which a world based on preponderance of the United States, allied with Europe, rich but powerless, would depend in order to limit the multiplication of competition. The same author had indicated that it was necessary to detach Ukraine from Russia because together they formed an empire, whereas separated, they were only states. The authors of those concepts, centered on the question of hegemony, power, neutralization, intend to reorganize the planet. None of them, or almost none of them, sought to establish universal peace, which they considered utopian. Their reflections are confirmed by the mutation induced in 2001 by the terrorist attacks against the pillars of American power. They show the limit of the nuclear deterrence. They showed, the limit of nuclear deterrence, unable to prevent recurrent attacks, nor to retaliate with the ultimate weapon. The United States conducted conventional operations that ultimately led to the withdrawal from Kabul in 2021, the humiliating image of which evokes the departure from Saigon in 1975. However, one should always listen to the leaders of authoritarian regimes. They have a habit of saying openly what they want, where they want to go, and even how. And we have the bad habit not to listen to them. Russia's Putin, China Xi, Turkey's Erdogan, but also America's Trump or Brazil Bolsonaro have in common that they spend their time announcing, shouting when necessary, their alternative vision to the decadent globalized society whose weaknesses they condemn, but whose democratic vitality they often fear. Each of them has a geographical representation of their territory, often ancient, quite distant from that of our school textbooks, which delineate their fundamental claims. One by one, the old empires are waking up, whether they are Persian, Iran, Ottoman, Turkey, Han, China, or Slavic Orthodox Russia. Tehran in Lebanon first, Ankara in the Caucasian File, Beijing in Hong Kong while waiting for Taiwan, Moscow in Ossetia, Transnistria, Crimea, and having intervened in Belarus and Kazakhstan, invades Ukraine. They try to recompose the idealized space of their national novel, and on which, since the first term of Barack Obama, the US administration has broken its teeth several times. In the Ukrainian question, the evidence of strategic imperative tends to blur the prevalence of energy resources. However, they also explain the rivalries that embrace a country larger than France, almost as populated as Spain, and with a rich European history. Founded by the Varegs, Vikings from Scandinavia, baptized by Byzantine missionary in 988, a powerful state under the reign of Yaroslav the Wise, Kiev Rus, also known as Ruthenia, is a common earth of the Slavic world, and, tossed between empires, never ceased to want to regain its independence. Today, as during the Second World War, the riches of its soils provoke covetousness. The breadbasket, which includes nearly a quarter of the arable land in Europe, also contains the coal mines of Donbass, the iron deposit of Krivoy Rog, and manganese of Nikopol, notable coal, uranium, and potash mines, with the powerful hydroelectric power of the Dnieper, and respond to the steel and industrial center around Donetsk and the most powerful nuclear plant in Europe. The country also controls the water supply of Crimea, which shed light on why Russia is so keen to maintain its control over this territory, inextricably integrated into its economy. After 1989, during the period of retraction of the USSR, which has become the CIS, the tacit agreement prevails that the border of the Atlantic Islands will not move to the east. But from the end of the Gorbachev presidency and during the Helsinki mandate, Russia expressed its opposition to the movement considered aggressive in terms of NATO expansion. For its part, Ukraine declared its independence in 1991 and in 1992, through the Treaty of Tashkent, renounced the arsenal that had briefly made it the third nuclear power in the world. In 1994, along with Belarus and Kazakhstan, it signed the Budapest Memoranda, in which the United States, the United Kingdom, and Russia guaranteed the territorial integrity and security of the former Soviet republics in exchange for the ratification of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. In 2009, those guarantees were reaffirmed by the United States and Russia, then rapidly forgotten in 2014. In the meantime, in 2002, the United States unilaterally withdrew from the Anti-Ballistic Missile Treaty, deployed anti-missile systems on the periphery of Russia, and announced its intention to acquire prompt global strike capabilities, thus calling into question Russia's second strike capability, and thus its deterrent force. NATO, under the impetus of Washington, launched its enlargement plan, MAP, to the east. The first three countries joined in 1999, followed by 7 in 2004, 2 in 2009, 2 more in 2017 and 2020. Since 1949, the Atlantic Alliance has grown from 12 to 30 members and has succeeded in integrating in a quarter of the century almost all the army of the founding nation of the Warsaw Pact. In Moscow, if the changeover in question can be accepted, as well as the neutralization of Kazakhstan, the slightest pivoting of Ukraine or Belarus cannot be envisaged. However, Russia is acting on the pretext of spontaneous or provoked local conflicts. Moldova was cut off from Transnistria in 1992. Chechen desire for independence was settled in blood in 1994-1996 and in 1999-2000 with the curious support of the United States. Georgia suffered the dissidence of Abkhazia and Ossetia, and then the intervention of Russian forces in 2008, while the separatists in Donbass were supported in the armed struggle from 2014 in a sort of dress rehearsal for the special military operation against Ukraine by Russia in 2022. For 20 years, Vladimir Putin has not ceased to warn that he would do everything to loosen up what he considered to be a vice-like grip. He was indignant about this during his speech in Munich in February 2007 at the Conference on Security Policing. He was vindictive, accusing the United States of stepping outside its border in all areas, of jeopardizing the security of all and international law, of dangerously pursuing an arms race, and of making the world less reliable than it was during the Cold War. After starting to modernize its military, destabilizing its adversary in the field of cyber warfare, mitigating the effect of sanctions by getting closer to his other friend enemy China, and waiting for the decisive moment, it will have decided by itself to go on the offensive. For the Western world, the use of violence is the ultimate signal for incompetence. This is not the case in the Slavic world, which sees it as a suitable means to the end. We need to remember Grozny. Since 2013, Russia has used and abused what is called hybrid war, cancelling the distinction between peacetime and wartime while combining hard and soft power. This strategic concept allows the Kremlin to test the postures and reaction of the Western camp, whose apathy encourages it as the next blow to outdo itself. We owe it to General Valery Gerasimov, but it is a part of a long tradition. It was born from a particular dimension of the strategy of the Byzantine Empire, with a theoric one that Leo Tolstoy lends to the Russian Tsar in his little-known opus, The Physiology of War, Napoleon and the Russian Campaign, and it has its first draft in The Evolution of Conflicts, the collection of lectures of 1920 by General Alexander Svechin, a Tsarist allied to the Bolshevik cause. He also inherited the Primakov doctrine, which guided Russian foreign policy for more than 2 decades. Born in Kiev, Minister of Foreign Affairs and Prime Minister from 1996 to 1999 under President Yeltsin, Yevgeny Primakov postulates that a unipolar world dominated by the United States is unacceptable, and that Russia must counterbalance the hegemony of the United States by promoting the emergence of new power, such as China or India, guarantee its primacy and maintain its control over the post-Soviet space, and oppose the expansion of NATO. By adopting the political axis of the Primakov doctrine, the confrontation with the West, the Gerasimov military doctrine maximizes it. By applying to the terrain of war, it affirms the importance of hybrid tools while confining them to their instrumental value and keeping military power as an indispensable catalyst. Nuclear weapons remain the ultimate guarantee of strategic independence. Thus, it is possible to successfully conduct a battle despite the threat of nuclear fire and by preventing escalation. As Dmitry Adamski analyzed, geopolitical competition did not end with the Cold War. It changed its form. And as Thibaut Fouillet specified, this form is that of an integral strategy which originally rests on a coordinated use of means of all kinds, civil, technical, and for military means, on a modernized and info-enhanced conventional apparatus using the totality of available functions, immaterial fields of disinformation, cyber proxies, etc., and also material fields of deep strikes, to produce sufficient tactical and operational effects to paralyze the enemy's ability to react. The implementation of the Gerasimov Doctrine from Georgia in 2008 to Syria from 2015 to Ukraine since 2014 have been calibrated to rule out excessive risk-taking. As the Georgian test showed, the conventional tool was outdated in terms of technology, communication, and mastery of complexity. Russia invested heavily, albeit in a targeted manner, to try to catch up. The current leader seems more influenced by the example of Crimea, but the model they ultimately choose to have will have crucial consequences for the future of the world under the watchful eye of China. Since 1989, Russia has been fighting on two fronts. Externally, Moscow has tried to limit the damage of the post-Cold War unipolar moment, during which its role in the international area suffered unprecedented marginalization. The Kremlin has continuously tried to move the international order toward multipolarity in order to secure a role in the concert of great powers. At the same time, competition with the West has taken place on the domestic scene. According to Moscow, the West, since the end of the Soviet Union, had tried to impose its value on Russia, perceived as a tool of geopolitical subversion. Thus, the Kremlin has considered external and internal competition as two aspects of the same geopolitical confrontation with the West. However, with the arrival of Vladimir Putin in power, the strategic competition with the West has constantly escalated from confrontation to war in the literal sense of the term and on European soil. The war had thus turned out to be total. Before the war, during the war, the same pursuit has animated and continued to animate this radical conflictuality. It was a war of propositioning that upset the life and destiny of Europe. It remains to be seen what China will learn from this for Taiwan and much more widely. President Putin and Xi Jinping outlined their vision to the world for the world order at a summit in December 2021, displaying a united front against the West. Today, they said, I quote, some international forces under the guise of democracy and human rights are interfering in the international affairs of China and Russia, trampling on international law and the recognized norm of international relations. China and Russia should increase their joint effort to more effectively safeguard the security interests of both sides. And not without giving his support to Vladimir Putin for the security guarantees that the later demands of the western flank of Russia, the two leaders also expressed a fundamental disagreement with the creation of new military alliances in the Pacific and Indo-Pacific basins, such as the AUKUS with Australia, Great Britain, and United States, or the Quad, Australia, India, Japan, United States. On February 2022, in Beijing, was also published a long statement adopted jointly by President Putin and Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the opening of the Winter Olympics. It enacts and proclaims a new era, a new global model for the 21st century, but advocating sustainable development for the planet, dialogue, justice, freedom, equality, mutual trust, and democracy as a universal human value exercised in all spheres of public life. Behind this proclamation lies a common affirmation of another model of governance that challenges that of liberal democracy. Behind the words, we are not talking about the same things. Hobbes already noted in Leviathan that war exists as long as the will to fight is sufficiently proven. This invites us to revisit the legal delimitations that govern international law, which stems from the Treaty of Westphalia, that is, the legitimacy of a political authority to declare war and to sign peace. Hobbes adds that the relevance of actuality of a war also lies in a recognized disposition to fight for as long as there is no assurance to the contrary. This then invites the reintegration of two aspects often absent from the military equation, the economic and psychological dimensions of conflict. War, through its historical nature, intrinsically combines two dimensions of time in a variable manner, repetition and innovation. Faced with those two constraining logic, the strategic state registers delays and acceleration. War remains linked to a variable iteration between repetition and singularity. Are we giving ourselves today the means that the singularity of the moment demands? Yesterday, before conventional wars, army had an alert time, that is, a relatively long period before engaging in combat. For the First World War, we can estimate an alert time of 4 years. For the Second War, 10 months. In 1990, 6 months. The alert time depends on the threat, on the enemy, and on your awareness. Since the attack of September 2001, Beslan massacre, conflict in Syria, annexation of Crimea, terrorist attack in Paris, or the offensive of Azerbaijan and Turkey in Nagorno-Karabakh, the alert time is now almost zero. Tomorrow, army will have little or no time to react. The means made available to them or not will determine the preservation of independence and rule of law. Once upon a time, a great military power was faced with a guerrilla war. While everything pointed to an imbalance of force in favor of the regular army, the guerrilla won. And this time has happened many times, in turn and among others in Indochina, Algeria, Vietnam, Afghanistan. By accelerating the feeling of national unity within a new resistant country, Ukraine, by promoting the appearance of a new heroic figure, a Churchillian figure, the servant of the people, President Zelensky, Vladimir Putin's Russia may just have created a new Afghanistan. Imagined in the Kremlin as liberator applaud in the street of Ukrainian city, Russian soldiers are discovering themselves as hated invaders. Moscow will perhaps succeed in the Anschluss in Kiev, but the military victory, more difficult to achieve than expected, will come at the price of a moral disaster in the Slavic world and an unprecedented disavowal for the Kremlin. The world disorder will not stop, nor will the violent revival of empire. The next conflicts are publicly announced. The intentions are not hidden. The Occident, particularly Europe, but not only, have little time left to decide on the future they want to build. The war on Ukraine is just the beginning. In the chaos of the Russian invasion, this is the violent rebirth of empire that is appearing. Thank you very much. I hope you will have a great day of conferences and speeches, and see you next year in Paris.